Let's talk about Citizen Genet. And today we'll pick up with the Treaty of Greenville, which was signed in August of 1795. Now, under this has to do with a lot of the land that makes up present-day Indiana and Ohio. Indiana and Ohio. That land was won by the United States during the American Revolution. However, who inhabits it? Who lives there? Native Americans. So, what the United States does is they make an agreement with the Native American people that live there. It's a treaty made with Native Americans. In exchange for most of present-day Indiana and Ohio, the Native Americans that inhabit it would receive a lump sum, one big payment, of $20,000, a lump sum of $20,000, an annual payment, also known as an annuity, an annual payment or annuity of $9,000, and the right to hunt on those lands. And what the Indians really wanted is recognition of their status, that they were a sovereign people, that they're making, like, this is a treaty. What is the definition of a treaty? What is a treaty? Who do we usually make treaties with? Other countries. This is a treaty with people that live within our own nation. And so what really want is to be acknowledged and recognized as their own sovereign people. So we make this treaty, and the Native Americans get to hunt on their land, and get to get payments every year. So does this treaty work out pretty well for the Native Americans? How many Native American tribes inhabit Ohio and Indiana today? I can't name any. They're gone. They've been pushed westward. Do you think the United States did a really good job at adhering to this treaty? No, they didn't. And this is just one example of hundreds of examples that you're going to see this year where Americans are constantly pushing back and pushing out Native Americans. So we talked about how one of our themes in American history is struggle. This is a great example of Native American struggle, where they try to play the game. They try to, you want to have a meeting and sign a treaty. It's a very, white man thing. Sign a treaty using your government. Okay, we'll play ball with that. And then the United States, do they even follow the treaty? No. Okay. They may have made a few payments, but pretty soon, who wanted that land? Settlers, as we continue to expand westward. And what happens to those Native Americans? They get pushed out. Either through violence or other means. Okay? So, just one example in a long series of examples of Native American treatment, poor Native American treatment by the United States. Okay? All right, Jay's Treaty. Okay, so President Washington has been stuck in the middle of every argument between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. And the main argument toward the end of his presidency is whether or not the United States should get involved in a war between what two European countries? France and Great Britain. Alexander Hamilton says Who should we back? Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists say we should back who? Great Britain. Very good. And Thomas Jefferson says we should back who? France. Okay, so who does George Washington side with? Neither one of them. He says we're going to stay neutral. Being neutral, however, has some downside because we're going to continue to do trade with both France and England. And our ships that are bound for France, could they be potentially sank or have our stolen or destroyed by the British, and vice versa? So it really gets us involved with both of them by not choosing a side. So, and what all President Washington wants to do is avert war. You know, our fledgling nation would not survive if we went into war. And so, in a last-ditch effort to try to avoid war, President Washington sends the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, at that time was John Jay, sends him to London in 1794. Now, John Jay is a Federalist. So right off the top, Thomas Jefferson's unhappy about that because they send a Federalist who's going to side with the British, right? That's what they want to do anyways. You know, the Jeffersonians were very unhappy over the choice of John Jay because they feared, that he would sell out our country to the British because he was an Anglophile, lover of the British, whereas Thomas Jefferson was a Francophile, lover of the French. So, and it was a big, everybody knew he was going, and when word gets back that he met with the Queen of England and was kissing her hand and doing all this, British stuff, following British royal courtly rules, looks really bad to a lot of the French-loving people or the supporters of the French. And remember, Citizen Edmond Genet had just been roaming throughout the countryside, rallying a lot of pro-French sentiment. So a lot of people were upset about this. But unhappily, John Jay enters the negotiations, and we're trying to negotiate, and it's like, you guys ever play poker? Imagine all you have is a pair of twos. Is that a good hand in poker? No. That's kind of what he goes into the negotiations with. When you negotiate, you need to have something to bargain with. We had nothing to bargain with. We were nobody. We had just started. Which, the British, basically what happens as a result of Jay's treaty is that the British promised to evacuate the posts that they still had on American soil. That was, they had, this is 1794. They had been there since the end of the American Revolution. There's still British soldiers in American soil. Can you imagine that today? If there was a fort, in your backyard and it had soldiers from a foreign country in it, it's hard for us to believe, but that's how it was. Also, we asked that the British pay for damages to the American ships that had been sank by the British. We asked that the British stop instigating Indians to fight us, because they were doing that. And the only reason they were really doing that was payback for the American Revolution. They would go to Native American Indian tribes and trade them for weapons and ammunition, and then say, over there's the bad white people. We're the good white people. You go shoot the bad white people. That's pretty much how they did it. And we also, the Treaty of Paris said that we were going to pay our debts from the American Revolution. Well, we didn't. Jay's Treaty reinforces that we pay our debts owed to the British on our pre-Revolutionary War accounts. Think this was a popular treaty in the United States? Popular or unpopular? Why do you think popular? Hmm? I mean, popular is in liked. Why wouldn't it be liked? I want you to pretend that you're a Jeffersonian, like you're a Democratic Republican. You're like Thomas Jefferson. Pretend you're Thomas Jefferson. How are you going to respond to this news of this treaty? Well, I'll tell you how Jefferson responded with rage. He was absolutely furious at the concessions made by this treaty. The treaty to him seemed like a complete and total surrender to the British. As well as a betrayal to the South, because the debts that have to be paid to the British are mainly held by the Southern farmers. Now, when I say farmers, I mean plantation owners, Southern planters. They're the ones responsible for paying the large share of the debts. Alexander Hamilton, John Jay don't care much about that. They're Federalists. They want mechanization and urbanization as opposed to an agrarian society. Okay, so one of the things, though, that happens as a result of Jay's treaty is that it makes the Spanish a little shaky, begin to fear us a little bit, because it seems as though the Americans are allying themselves with the British. Well, in the New World, in North America, what are the only countries that have territory there in North America? The Spanish, the British, and us. Well, now that the Americans and the British seem to be allied together, who gets a little bit shaky? The Spanish. Okay? So it kind of forces them to want to make a deal with us. All right? It forces them to kind of want to make a deal with us. And the deal that they make very soon after Jay's Treaty is called Pinckney's Treaty. Pinckney's. And that was very soon after, in 1795. Pinckney's Treaty, Spain basically just gives us a gift without really anything in return. They give us land in North Florida, not all of Florida, north of Florida, like Jacksonville and the Panhandle, like Tallahassee, the western Panhandle of Florida. All the way to the Mississippi River. And they don't give us the Mississippi River, but what they do give us is they allow us to use it, which is basically given to us. Free navigation of the Mississippi River. That's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the Mississippi River, but it is the largest river in North America, and it is easily navigable, meaning you can take large boats on it. And that's very important for commerce, because farmers that live all the way up here, let's see here, all the way up here in like Illinois and Missouri and Tennessee, all those farmers that live there, they can ship their stuff and they can send it to the Caribbean where they're growing all the sugar. So they can feed those sugar plantations and all the slaves and all the plantation owners there. And it's good for them because now they can make more money. It's good for the American economy. So Pinckney's Treaty becomes a pretty important, as far as emboldening and increasing the power of the United States. Okay? All right. So, President Washington is absolutely at his wits' end. He has served for 2 terms. He's exhausted. He's sick of Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson's constant bickering and arguing like children. And so, after serving 8 years as President of the United States, even though he could have served as long as he wanted to, he decides to retire. In doing that, it sets a precedent that presidents only serve 2 terms. It's not a law at that point. It's a precedent, one that almost every president that every president adheres to up until the 1940s, when FDR serves 4 terms. Now, a president can only serve 2 terms because there's been an amendment made. You can only serve 2. But at this time, Washington, he's sick of it, he's tired, he serves 2 terms and that's it. And that's what most presidents do from that point forward, okay? Establishing a 2-term tradition for American presidents. So, Washington's contributions as president were enormous, even with Hamilton and Jefferson there all the time. The central government becomes thoroughly and efficiently established. The West was expanding. We have merchants plowing through the seas. And above all, President Washington keeps our country out of war. Keeps us out of war. The general, the military hero, keeps us out of war. So, central government solidly established, westward expansion, merchants plowing through the seas, and keeps us out of foreign entanglements, foreign wars. So, our experimental stage has passed, and now the presidential chair could be turned over to, a much less impressive figure, but a figure that we are notoriously ungrateful to, and that is President John Adams. John Adams. What political party is John Adams a member of? It's an F word. Federalists. He's a Federalist. Now, Alexander Hamilton is obviously the best known member of the Federalist Party. He can't run for president. Why? He's not a natural born citizen. He cannot run for president. So, the Federalists are forced to turn to President Washington's vice president. A highly experienced, highly intelligent man. He was right there with, the Sons of Liberty and his cousin Samuel Adams, right at the beginning of the American Revolution. Part of the First and Second Continental Congresses. He had been in France for years and years as a diplomat and begging for money for our young nation. Very, very principled man, highly principled. And so, in the election, it's basically, the 2-party system is formed, and it's John Adams. He wins. And who gets second? Well, who's the party he's running against? Thomas Jefferson's party, and so it's Thomas Jefferson. And who wins? John Adams. He wins 71-68 in the Electoral College. That doesn't seem like a lot of votes and it's not because the United States was so small. Tomorrow, when you watch the election returns, you'll see that the winner has to get 270. So whoever gets 270 votes first wins, okay? Or just 270 votes. It doesn't matter when they get it, all right? But John Adams wins. Now, at this time, there was no such thing as running mates. Like President Trump has Mike Pence and Vice President Biden has Kamala Harris. They have running mates. They didn't have running mates. So who became vice president when John Adams became president? The runner-up. Can you imagine if the loser of tomorrow's election has to become the vice president to the winner? How do you think that would work out? You think they'd have some interesting meetings? Yeah. That's why we don't do that anymore, because they hate each other. All right? And John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, a lot of historical records say, they're very close friends. Like friends. Like Thomas Jefferson and Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, were buddies. Like they spent time together and enjoyed each other's company. They were friends. And after this election, they didn't speak to each other for nearly 30 years. Nearly 30 years. And it's really sad. And it was only toward the end of both of their lives that they rekindled their relationship through letters. And those letters can be found at the Library of Congress, and they're really cool because we have them. It's just correspondence back and forth between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who coincidentally both died on the same day, July the 4th, 1826, on the 50-year anniversary of the United States. They both died on the same day, the 50-year anniversary. Now, that has nothing to do with this, but it's just a neat coincidence. All right, so John Adams was a man of very stern principles, stubborn, absolutely stubborn in his principles, unbending to his devotion. He was also tactless. You guys know what the word tactless means? He had no tact. T-A-C-T, tactless. What does that mean? Like if I see a student not paying attention, playing on their phone, and a tactful way of doing it might be to go stand beside them and just stand there and just kind of be around them. They may put their phone away, right? That would be tactful. A tactless way is for me to be like, hey, moron, put your phone away. That's John Adams. Okay? No tact whatsoever. And he's so principled that when he sees somebody doing something that violates his principles, he attacks them. He attacks them without, he's totally tactless. Well, are you going to make a lot of friends doing that? Because he's very unforgiving. He's very disliked. He's not a likable person. He's brash. He, a lot of people. He has a lot of enemies because he insults people in public. And if you know anything about politics, you don't do that. You don't want to insult people, especially people in your own party, in public. So he was an aristocrat. He's a lawyer. Didn't really appeal to the common man, the masses. He was kind of a crusty New Englander. In addition to these handicaps, who's he following? George Washington, one of the greatest men, not to mention presidents, we've ever had. He was a great man. How would you like to step into those shoes? He's kind of bound for failure. John Adams' legacy is kind of sad because he was so important during the American Revolution. His presidency, terrible. Now, I'm not saying he's a terrible president. His presidency is terrible, okay? So, it didn't matter who came after Washington. They were going to have a bad presidency because what they inherited with this neutrality they're trying to maintain, the fact that George Washington was awesome is difficult to step into. The fact that his vice president hates his guts now and wanted to be president. It was 71-68. It was 3 electoral college votes. Jefferson kind of feels cheated. So, now John Adams has inherited all these problems. We got the Jay's Treaty, which had just happened, which is very favorable to the French. Very favorable to the British. How do you think the French feel about that treaty? They don't like it, okay? So the French were infuriated by Jay's Treaty, and they're like, hey, what happened to that time you guys were in desperate straits during your own revolution, and we came to your rescue, and we signed a treaty in 1778, the Franco-American Alliance. What happened to that? You just throwing that away? You gonna wipe your rear with it and forget about us and give favor the people who are making you rich now? So, in response to the Jay's Treaty, French warships begin to basically, if they see an American ship in the seas, they capture it. They seize it, destroy it, steal all the stuff on it. What would happen if that happened today? If we were sending ships to Europe and a country said we're going to attack every American ship that we see. What would happen today? War. So, is that not an act of war? Yes, it is definitely an act of war. And so, does John Adams want us to go to war? No. So what would you do if this was happening to your country and you're the president and you wanted to avoid war? What would you do? We're going to send somebody and we're going to talk it out. Okay? So, John Adams appoints some people to go to France and meet with the French. It was 3 guys he sent. The most famous of them was John Marshall. You ever heard of him? You ever heard of Marshall University? John Marshall. All right. Now, these 3 diplomats or envoys arrived in Paris in 1797. And they hoped to meet with the French Prime Minister, French Foreign Minister, I should say. Wanted to meet with the French Foreign Minister, Talleyrand. It looks like Talleyrand. Talley, Rand. Talleyrand. His name's Charles Maurice de Talleyrand. Talleyrand. Okay? So that's how you would spell it. Talleyrand. All right, so they hoped to meet with Talleyrand. However, before they got there, they were met by 3 of Talleyrand's assistants. These 3 assistants, we don't know who they are. We don't know their names. But they said, yes, the foreign minister would love to meet with you. We simply require $250,000 to arrange this meeting. They wanted $250,000 to talk. What is this? It's a bribe. Well, if you're an American ambassador and somebody says we want $250,000, what do you say? First off, I don't have it. I'm just an ambassador. I've been given no permission to spend any money just to talk. Could you imagine it'd be like, hey, Canada, we'd love to talk with you about something. Tell you what, you come on over to the White House, bring $1 million, and then you can meet the president. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. How do you think the Canadian people would feel about that? Upset, insulted. How do you think the Americans felt? Upset and insulted. And when this intolerable action, because we don't know those guys, this is the XYZ affair. It's called the XYZ affair because we don't know those guys' names. We call them X, Y, and Z. That's why it's called that. So, when word gets back to the United States that the French government wanted a bribe to talk to avoid war, how do you think the American people responded? Hysterically. War hysteria swept through the United States. Who do they want to go to war with? France. So not only are we feel like we're being singled out because they're sinking our ships and killing our sailors, but when we go talk to them to try to figure it out, They refuse to even talk to us because they want a bribe. Somebody will make some heads roll, right? Can you imagine somebody sliding America like that today? It'd be bad news bears for them, wouldn't it? They'd only do it once. Okay? So, war hysteria swept through the United States, and it even catches up to John Adams. Even he wants to go to war. So the Federalists were pumped. They're like, man, I can't believe those morons in France did that. Because they don't like the French anyway. They favor the British. Jefferson is kind of embarrassed. He's like, oh, France, you shouldn't have done that. I can't back it. How are you going to support how are you going to be like, I guess they got their days confused. You can't really support that. So the thing about it, though, is that the France was already at war with the British, and they had their hands full, totally full. They wanted no war with America. And Talleyrand, the French minister, he realized that a fight with the United States would merely add an enemy to his roster. And Talleyrand basically kind of snuck it out, let it be known through the grapevine that if the Americans sent a new minister, that he would hear them and that minister would be received with proper respect. So, John Adams sends a new minister. However, but by the time that he arrived, and before he even arrived, France had had some political upheaval, and their government collapsed and was taken over by a dictator, a military dictator. And that actually, it sounds like it would be really bad for America. It turned out wonderfully for America. Who was the dictator? Napoleon Bonaparte. You ever heard of him? Napoleon, the little corporal. He had seized dictatorial power, and he was eager to free his hands of silly American squabble. His goal was to conquer the world, but he wanted to do it with Europe first. He didn't want to fool with America. Go away. Yeah, we'll stop doing that. We're going to go annihilate the British. I don't have time to fool with you, America. All right? So after a great deal of haggling, France agreed to annul the Franco-American alliance of 1778, allowing us to be truly neutral. Kind of like, all right, so he never gets it, but John Adams deserves an enormous amount of credit. An enormous amount of credit for handling this the way he did. Peace reigned. There was no war. Even though he was moved to go to war, he was ready to deploy. He'd already picked out the uniforms. They were going to war. Cooler heads prevailed, and Adams not only avoided the hazards of war, but he creates an open dialogue between the United States and France, which eventually, especially with this dictator Napoleon, which leads to a very significant purchase in just 3 years. And that purchase, the Louisiana Purchase, happens in 1803. Now, John Adams is long gone by that point. He's no longer the president. But because of this being able to talk to Napoleon, it leads to those friendly relations and our ability to do business with one another, even though he's a dictator. America would never do business with a dictator anymore. But a lot has happened from 1799 to 2020. Okay? All right. So questions on any of these fascinating topics we've discussed today? You feel smarter? Oh boy. You guys are such good liars. Make sure that you talk to your parents about the election tomorrow. Find out how they feel. You don't have to report back anything. It's just for your own edification. And there are no assignments tomorrow. But if you'd like to look over your notes to prepare for your test, which is on Thursday, you're more than welcome to do that. But it's a holiday, so treat it as such. And I will see you guys. I'll see you guys in class on, I guess, a week from today. And I'll see everybody else Wednesday.